Hello. Today we're going to look at green fertilizers, or green manure if you prefer. We need to define our term fertilizer. So let's go back to basics a second. Now, the huge majority of plants on our planet actually develop and grow due to a process called photosynthesis. And for photosynthesis, they need the sun, carbon dioxide from the air, water, and soil. Now let's look at this element, soil. Fertilizers, as the name suggests, increase the fertility of soil. And we have fertilizers you can buy at the garden centre, which come in various forms, such as granules or powders, or even things like kinds of composts and manures. And also we have, which is what I want to talk about today, green fertilizers or manure, which are in fact other plants which improve the fertility of the soil for the plants you want to grow. So, what do we need to know about fertilizers? What's in them? What do plants need to grow and thrive? What things are in fertilizer and why do plants need them? Well, I'm going to concentrate on what I call the big three. Three elements, often called the macro elements or macronutrients, which is a fancy way of saying the elements that plants need in quantity. Now, if you go into a garden shop, often you'll see on packets of fertilizer three letters, N, P and K. And these stand for elements. N stands for nitrogen, P for phosphorus and K for potassium. And why are they important? Well, let's look at that together. N, nitrogen. Nitrogen is needed by plants to produce chlorophyll, which is responsible for the green colour of plants and of course is essential for photosynthesis. Now, by a strange quirk of nature, the air is about 78% nitrogen, but most plants can't actually take nitrogen from the air. It's not in the right form for them, and they actually need to, in fact, absorb it by their roots. We'll come back to that later. The second thing is P, phosphorus. Now, why is phosphorus important? Well, phosphorus is involved in the healthy production of roots, flowers and fruit. Extremely important if you're producing things like fruit trees and you want lots of apples and plums, for example. Or maybe you're a flower producer and you want lots of beautiful flowers in your garden. And the last one is K, potassium. Now, potassium is used for lots of processes in the plant, but I often call it the element of robustness. It's involved in so many processes like water absorption or absorption of other elements, and also it has a certain role to play in production of flowers and fruit too. So these are the big three, and there is a list of lots of other lesser elements which are needed, often in minute quantities, by the plants. Now, when you look on your packet of fertilizer in your garden centre, you will often see accompanying these three letters of NPK, some numbers such as 20, 20, 20. And this is telling you the proportion of these elements in the fertiliser. So it's always done in the same order, NPK. So 20, 20, 20 means 20 parts nitrogen, 20 parts phosphorus, and 20 parts potassium. But they can vary depending on what the fertiliser is going to be used for. For example, if you want lots of green production, for example for grass or maybe lettuce, you want lots of nitrogen, which produces the chlorophyll. So maybe you'll have something like 25-5, which means 20 parts of nitrogen, 5 of phosphorus, and 5 of potassium. And also, the size of these numbers gives you an idea of the quantity actually found in the fertiliser. So 20, 20, 20 will have more nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium than a fertiliser which has 10, 10, 10. So now, we've looked at what's in fertilisers. So let's look at green fertilisers, which is what I recommend, certainly in the permaculture garden. Industrial fertilisers have a bit of a bad press because they're usually used in a kind of mineral form or liquid form. And unfortunately, the fertiliser is washed off the land into the water table or into our waterways and into the sea, which causes all sorts of imbalances in these ecosystems. However, as I said, we have green fertilisers or green manure that we can use. So what are the advantages? Well, green manure or green fertiliser is planted just after the harvest on your plot of land and allows the ground to rest. It protects the topsoil because it actually binds to the topsoil, and if you're in an area where there's a lot of rain or wind, it stops the topsoil from being washed away or blown away. It also provides not only the nutrients we need for the land when it's cut down or when it just dies, it also provides a lot of what I call humus or organic material. All the leaves and stems and so on will degrade slowly in the soil and certainly help with the soil texture, which ultimately helps with soil water retention and drainage. Also, when they're growing, this is actually Phacelia, this is actually a green manure or green fertiliser. A lot of them flower and attract a lot of pollinators. The local bumblebees and bees and hoverflies and so on adore this plant. So it attracts these pollinators into my garden, which helps with the pollination of my garden. But also it attracts certain predators which take care of some of those pesky pests which attack the things that we're growing in our garden. There are certain green fertilisers that also fix nitrogen. So what does that mean? Well, in fact, there are certain plants that on their roots they have little nodules, and in these nodules live a certain bacteria, and there's a kind of symbiotic relationship, which means a kind of win-win relationship. They're helping each other out. So the plant provides a home and possibly foodstuffs for the bacteria that are living in these nodules, and in return the bacteria actually take nitrogen from the little air pockets in the soil and convert it into a form that can be absorbed by the plant. These plants are particularly valuable for adding nitrogen to the soil. So there are the advantages of our green fertilizers. So let's look at a few of them. Now there's a whole list, and you can look at the list by pausing the video and take your time. But I'm just going to look at 3 examples. Now the first example is this one we have here. Phacelia, or Phacelia if you wish, is a green fertiliser. It's planted before your growing season. You then either let it die or cut it down a couple of weeks before you're going to sow your seeds or plant your plants, and it will do its function of adding all that goodness to the soil as needed. Another one I'd like to look at, another popular one, is mustard. Now, one thing I want to mention about mustard is it's part of the Brassica family. Now, if anybody does rotation of their crops in their garden, you have to be aware that mustard is part of the Brassica family, which includes things like cabbage, radish and swede, and that counts as a growing year for that particular plot for brassicas. So you don't want to plant brassicas again following the mustard. Just a thing to note. The last thing I'd like to look at is what I call the legumes or leguminous plants. These are often part of the pea family, things like peas and beans and so on. And these are these famous green fertiliser plants which have those nodules on their roots which fix nitrogen. In fact, here I've got some peas growing, but these are actually to eat because I want to eat the peas, but they'll also act as a very, very useful green fertiliser for this mound I have here, for the following plants that will be growing here certainly next year. So there, we've done a little tour of green fertilisers and why they're good. We have a list that you can look at your leisure by pausing the video. And so now we know if we want to add a little bit more vitality to our soil, certainly if we are intensively growing fruit and vegetables, which certainly take a lot of goodness out of the soil, so we need to feed our soil, to feed our plants, to feed ourselves.